Okay, so again, this afternoon session is VCSAD 5. It is the first part of payroll, module setup. What we'll be looking at today is the types of things that we would do before payroll, the setup type items. So we're going to look at how to set up pay periods. We're going to look at how to set up some payroll rules that can be configured in our system. And we'll also look at where you can place payroll ID numbers for your employees, something that might be used if you are exporting your information to a payroll system. Okay, so we're going to start off this afternoon under the Administration menu, and we're going to go down here to Payroll Setup Center. And first thing we're going to look at here is pay periods. So in our system, we can enter our pay periods, so that way whenever we run payroll, the system knows already what dates to grab, where to look for schedule information for that pay period. Now, if you are a brand new client, and this is your first time working with payroll, this screen will likely be blank. If you are an existing client who's here for a bit of a refresher, you may already have some pay periods set up here, and some of them may even have been opened and closed already, like you can see on my screen here. But regardless, if you're brand new or if you're an existing customer, the way we set up our pay periods is the same. Over here on the right, we have a couple of items that we can fill out, and the system will try to generate our pay periods for us automatically. So first thing that we have up at the top here is the year. Now, if you're a brand new customer, this is probably defaulting to 2016. For somebody like myself who has a number of pay periods already built out, this is looking at whatever the next year is that we don't have pay periods built for. Okay, the next is how many pay periods do we have in a year? So in our case here, we have 26. Now that number can be adjusted. So if you run payroll weekly, maybe that would be 52 pay periods in a year. Or if you run it every 4 weeks, then I guess it would be like 13 pay periods in a year. Or maybe I'm off on that. Maybe that's, yeah, something like that, 12, something along those lines. And then days in the period. So 14 days if it's 2 weeks, 7 days if it's a week, 28 days if it's every 4 weeks. And then we pick the start date. Now, if you don't have any pay periods set up yet, then you'll need to go in and manually identify what the start date is. And you can do that by using the drop-down calendar here. If you already have at least one pay period set, then this system is going to automatically look at the last date of the last pay period and grab the next date, figuring that is probably when the start date of your new pay period is. Okay, so once I have these set the way I would like them to be, I just go ahead and I hit Show Next Year. And that's going to bring up all these pay periods that it has figured out based on the start date, the number of days in a period, and the number of periods in the year. Now, it is possible to make some edits here. You know, I've seen some departments where maybe maybe they cut their last pay period into 2 pieces so that way it fits neatly into the calendar year. So I can go in and edit the dates if I need to, maybe have this pay period end a little bit earlier or something. I can also adjust these special handling options here. Special handling is used by departments that maybe have a 2-week pay period, but maybe only pay overtime every other week. So we can identify that one pay period is the first half of a 28-day cycle, and a second pay period is the last half of the 28-day cycle. Okay, so that's only necessary if you have any rules like that where you kind of hold off on paying overtime until the second pay period of the, or every other pay period, I guess would be the best way to say it. If you don't do that, if your overtime is processed each pay period kind of individually, you can leave those as none the way they appear here. And once you have your dates set and everything looks good, all you do is come up to the top here and click Save. And that will add that to your drop down here, and those pay periods will be ready to use and to be processed. Okay. And obviously you will use that same process to build out additional years. You can build pay periods out as far as you like. You know, I can build it out for the rest of this year and next year if I like. I can build it out for the next 5 years. All of that is fine. The only thing you just want to do is at the end of each year, you just want to take an opportunity to verify that you have the next year's pay periods built out. So that way when you go to run payroll, you don't end up in a situation where the pay periods aren't set and now you have to go back and do it. And sometimes for some departments, the day they run payroll is a little bit of a time crunch. So having to take an extra step to build the pay periods in there might not be an ideal situation. Okay. So that's how we build our pay periods into the system. Does anybody have any questions about that, about how to enter those or any specific scenarios that apply to their department? Okay, don't see anything coming through, so we'll move on from there. After we're done defining our pay periods, the next thing that we're going to do is still under Administration and Payroll Setup Center. We're going to go to Payroll Rules. Now, the Payroll Rules section lets us set up a handful of rules that might pertain to my department. Not every department uses all of these rules. Some departments pick and choose the ones that apply to them. Some departments don't use any. There may be nothing here that applies to your department. So not necessarily a required thing, but we will talk about some of the options that we have available here. Payroll rules are set up by work group. So I can have different sets of rules for different work groups. Maybe my sworn employees have different rules than my civilian employees. You know, maybe my sergeants have different rules than my officers. So rules can be different for different work groups. So we'll go ahead, we'll walk through some of the options that you have here. If you want to set up rules, you just click on the work group you want to set them up for. And the first couple tabs, the first 3 tabs here, have to do with overtime processing. These are rules in our system that can double check your overtime in a pay period and can potentially recalculate overtime to be either straight time or time and a half based on the rules that you set here. Okay, so some departments, anything above and beyond what I'm normally scheduled for, that's automatically overtime. And that's fine, that's easy, you don't have to set any rules up for that. You just enter stuff as overtime and it'll be reported that way to payroll. But for some departments, I may have to hit a certain number of hours worked in a certain period of time. And if I don't hit those hours, my overtime might be straight time. And if I do hit the hours, then my overtime might be time and a half. If that's the case for your department, then these rules might be something you want to set up. So we would enter information here. The first item is number of hours worked before overtime. And the second item is number of days in a work period. So most common things here would be maybe 80 hours in a 14-day period, or maybe 70 hours in a 14-day period, depending on contracts. Or sometimes we might see something like 40 hours or 35 hours in a 7-day pay period. Okay. Even if your pay period is a 14-day pay period, you can still have the system check overtime based on a 7-day work period. Okay, so the system will just check the first week, and then it will check the second week. Okay, so that is an option to do. The other option we have here is to use the pay period special handling. That looks directly back at the pay periods that we just set up. So for some departments, it might be 80 hours in a 14-day work period. But we might use the pay period special handling where we might only end up paying that overtime on the second week. Or another common one that I see might be 160 hours in a 28-day cycle. And then the pay period special handling is how the system knows which two pay periods match up together to make the 28-day work period. Okay, so you would set up your number of hours worked and your number of days in a work period that we use to calculate overtime. Over here we have two checkboxes. Anything that, the first one, count time earned towards hours worked, that just says that any type of time off, any type of overtime, I should say, that is paid in time, does that count towards the 160 hours you need to get before time and a half? If it does, you check that box. Second box says count cash earned towards hours worked. Again, if I work overtime, if I work some extra hours and they're paid at cash, should they count towards getting me to that 160-hour threshold that I need to hit before my overtime kicks in, or my 80-hour threshold before my overtime kicks in? Okay, so the system's going to take those pieces of information, and it's going to figure out how many hours a person has in the work period, and then determine if it should mark those items as time and a half or as overtime. As time and a half or straight time, I should say. Now, we also have down here a space to identify any holiday overtime. So if your department has any rules where employees get paid for working on the holiday, they get some extra pay because they work a holiday, You can identify the overtime code used for holiday overtime. And by default, we won't count that towards their hours worked, because it's not actual time worked, it's just some bonus hours or bonus pay for the holiday. But if you want that to be included in there, you can check that box, and that will subject that to be recalculated to possibly come out as straight time if the employee did not meet enough hours to go into time and a half. Okay, so the next couple tabs, they all play into this as well. The next item here, day off selection, this is where we can pick what time off codes count towards hours worked. So depending on how your department operates, this might be none. Maybe none of your time off count towards hours worked. So if I'm scheduled for 80 hours in 2 weeks and I take 8 hours of vacation, that might put me down at 72 hours worked. And I now might have to get 8 hours of straight time until I get to the time and a half threshold. Okay, or maybe certain things do count. Maybe your vacation counts and your personal time counts and your comp time counts, but maybe your sick time doesn't, or suspension time doesn't, something like that. You can use these checkboxes to mimic the rules that your department has on what types of time off count towards that hours worked threshold. Okay, and then the third tab, overtime selection, I can use this to select certain types of overtime that always pay a time and a half, no matter how many hours were worked, or certain overtime codes that always pay at straight time, no matter how many hours are worked. So if you have certain overtime reasons that you have to pay at straight time, maybe training time always pays at straight time, maybe it's never a time and a half situation. You know, or maybe you have something like a call-in or a forced overtime, and maybe that's always time and a half, regardless of how many hours I worked in that time frame there. You can identify those overtime codes here by placing a check next to them in the top section or the bottom section. Okay, so that's the main, those are the main items for overtime processing. That's how you would set those up. One other item to point out down here, auto-generate overtime. This can be used if maybe employees are scheduled for more than 40 hours a week or more than 80 hours every 2 weeks. We can have the system automatically generate an overtime entry for however many hours a person is scheduled above and beyond the hours that we put here. Okay, if that's something that you would need to do, you would put a check in this box to turn it on, and then you would use the select buttons to select what is the overtime code we want to use. What type of overtime do we want to call this? Maybe you have a special code, you know, called auto-generated overtime or scheduled overtime or something like that. Well, you can choose that from your list here. Then you would also identify the overtime shift. Where do you want to place that overtime entry? All overtime entries have to have a shift for them to be entered. So again, you may have a special shift for this, so that way it's not cluttering up your regular day-to-day shifts. You might have an auto-generated overtime shift or something. And then finally, the pay type. You know, depending on what you want the factor to be, and also do you want it to be cash, or maybe you just give them time in a bank to use later. So you can choose that there as well. So that's only necessary if you are auto-generating overtime. Sometimes helpful if your employees are scheduled for more hours than the normal work hours in a work period would be. The only thing that I warn about that is that it does not allow for any variation on your codes. All that overtime is going to be coded the same way. So if you need to we'll say differentiate why that overtime happened. You know, if there's different reasons why people are scheduled for that time, and you want to be able to report on these items differently, it may be important to have the employees submit those manually so that way the right overtime code can be selected. Otherwise, it's going to all be lumped into one overtime code. Okay? So that's the first set of rules, the overtime processing. That covers these first three tabs here. Does anybody have any questions about how that's set up, or maybe any specific questions or examples from their own department? Okay, I don't seem to see anything coming through here. Okay, great. So we'll move on to the other tabs here. Auto time sellback. This is an option where we can set a max amount for a certain bank. And if the employee is above that amount, if their balance is above that amount when we run payroll, it will automatically sell that time back. So some departments may have rules in place that say, you know, if you're over, I don't know, 40 hours of comp time, we're automatically going to cash that time out and pay you for it on your next check. So if that applies to your department, to turn it on, you would put a check in the box here that says perform auto time sellback. And then you would mark which types of time you want to perform that for. Maybe it's just comp time. Now, we also would need to identify what the max amount is for that bank so the system knows when it should sell that time back. And to do that, we're going to have to go to a little bit different screen. We're still under Administration and Payroll Setup Center, but it's called Setup Time Bank Settings right here. And this would let me select one or more employees. And select the type of time that I want to put a max amount in for. And if I hit refresh, I'll get all their names here. And this column here will let me enter a max amount. So if you're just putting this in initially, that'll probably be 0, but I can go down and I can change these to whatever I need them to be. They can all be the same if I want. They can be individualized if different people have different amounts. I can also use this field up here. If everybody has the same thing, I can say, take the max amount for everybody here and make it 40. And then I hit apply, and that will change all the max amounts to 40. And then I would go ahead and save that, and that would make the max amount for that bank 40 hours. Okay, so Setting up that auto time sellback, you would put your checkboxes here, but you would also need to go to set up time bank settings to enter the max amount. Okay. Does auto time sellback sound like anything that anybody in here would use? So I have a question coming through on the chat, and it says, we have auto sellback at the end of the year for any comp hours over 60. Can this be set up or only by pay period? These rules that we're looking at here would be on a pay period by pay period basis. What you're talking about would be a manual process at the end of the year, and you'd be able to use, if you go under Administration and Payroll Setup Center, it's called Time Sellback. And you could go down at the end of the year, potentially select all your employees, select your comp bank, and if you hit refresh, this will show all of your employees and how much time is in how much their current balance is. So you'd be able to go in here and put in how much you want to sell back, right? So, you said your max is 60. In our case here, maybe it's 30. So I say this person's got to sell back 3 hours, but everybody else is okay. And then I can set an effective date, which would probably be the day that you're running this. And I can make a note about time sellback, or I can add to that if you want to call it something different. And then I hit apply, and that's going to save that. It'll remove the time from the employee's bank. It'll make a note of that time being removed in the administrative days log. And it's also got those hours flagged as hours that are sold back. So it's possible, if you're exporting to a payroll company, that information could be pulled into the export and included when you go to run or submit that last pay period at the end of the year. Okay, so there's not an automated process for that. The rules that we're setting up now would be for something that we run every pay period. Yours would be more of a manual process that you would run using this time sellback screen. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, very good. Okay, so if there's no other questions on time sellback, I'm going to go to the last section here in our payroll rules. And that's for auto shift differential. So our system has the ability for us to enter rules to automatically figure out if someone should get shift differential when they work certain hours. Okay, so for setting this up, the first thing we do at the top here is we identify, do we want to apply shift differential rules to regular schedule entries or overtime entries or both? And we indicate that with a check mark next to the proper box there. Then down here, this is where we identify what our shift diff rules are. So you can identify regular hours if you want. It's not normally necessary. The system makes the assumption that any time range not covered here falls into regular. So we can say that night differential is from 1900 to 0700. And these labels can be whatever you like. Maybe we also have an afternoon differential. And maybe that goes from like 1500 to 1900. Okay, so here we're identifying which hours count as which type of differential. And this means that when we run payroll, the system will be able to compare the hours that somebody worked and say, okay, all of this is night differential, or some of it's afternoon differential and some of it's night differential, or some of it's night differential and some of it's just regular hours, no differential. Okay, so that's how you can set up the rules, the basic rules, the hours part of the rules. Now, if you just stop right there, then everybody who's in this work group will have these rules applied to them. But it is possible to further narrow that down using these two items here. What we can do is we can say these rules apply to anybody who's in this work group, but only the ones that are in this regular group and working this shift. Okay, so if I'm in group A, or my group is squad A, whenever I'm working nights, then check the hours for shift differential. Squad B, whenever they're working nights, check for shift differential. Same for squad C and squad D. We do that by picking a group and a work shift. So I could say, anytime from somebody from squad A is working patrol days, I want to add a rule for that too. So now squad A on days, we'll check those hours against the rules here. The other option is to set up rules just by home shift. So if you've identified a home shift in your employees' profiles, we could say to only run these rules for people who have a certain home shift. Some departments do that for night shift people. Maybe the rules in your department are, we pay differential for night shift, but only for the people who are regularly scheduled to work night shift. So if your home shift is night shift, we run those rules for you. But if you're somebody whose home shift is day shift and you work overtime at night, or you get moved to work nights for one day, maybe you're not entitled to the shift differential. So that's how we can set up rules like that. We can say, you get differential between these hours if you're in this group, but only if your home shift is patrol night shift. And I can add a rule for that as well. Okay, so depending on how specific your shift differential rules are would really dictate if you can just stop right here and leave the rules kind of generic for everybody in that work group, or if you need to get more specific and identify specific times that those rules would actually apply based on group and work shift or based on home shift. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about setting up shift differential, or any specific questions about shift differential rules that your department might have? Okay, no No shift diff questions? Everybody's good with that? Of course, after you make changes to any of these tabs here, you want to hit save up at the top. If you navigate away like I just did, your changes will not be saved. Okay. All right, so those are the different types of payroll rules that we can set to run automatically when you run your payroll every 2 weeks or every week or whatever it might be. The last item to talk about this afternoon is entering payroll IDs for your employees. And this would be used if you were looking to export your information from our system to a payroll system. These payroll IDs that you enter, they will also show up on employee timesheets. So if you want this ID number to show up on the employee timesheets that you create, it's important to fill this field out. To do that, you're going to go under Administration and Employee Center, and you're going to go here to Pay Info. And for each employee that you have here, when you click on their name, you'll have a payroll ID field that you can enter for them. Okay, so there's a great deal of characters in there. You shouldn't have run into a problem with a character limit, but you can go ahead and place that in there. Some departments use the payroll ID as the employee ID number as well, the employee code. That's fine. You know, when we're talking about doing like an export into payroll, we can usually pull that. So if that's the same number, that's fine. But if you want it to show on your timesheets, if it's important to have that payroll ID number show on the timesheets, then you do want to enter it here. The timesheets will only pull from that field. And while we're talking about it, in the department field, this larger section here is a place where you can put a department number or a department code. Now, that's not necessarily something we need for payroll. It's sometimes on a case-by-case basis, depending on what types of information your payroll company wants. But that field will appear on your employee timesheets. So if you would like to see a department number or a department code show on employee timesheets, it would be important to place that there as well. Okay, again, these are free entry fields. I can put whatever I need in there. You know, usually your payroll ID is just a digit, you know, a series of digits. But your department could be a number, or you could spell something out, you know. Either way, whatever is here will display on your timesheet for that employee. And of course, once you're done making changes, you want to go ahead and click Save up at the top. And you can continue on for any other employees that you need to add that information. Okay. All right, does anybody have any questions on how to enter the employee's payroll ID or the department code or what those items would be used for in our system? Okay, I don't think I see anything else coming through here. So that covers our 3 setup topics for this afternoon. Does anybody have any questions about any of those items that we covered? Setting up pay periods, setting up any of the payroll rules, including overtime recalculation, auto time sailback, or auto shift differential, or entering payroll IDs and department codes for employees. Any general questions, or anybody have specific rules for their department that they might want to ask about or need clarification on how they would be entered into the system? Okay, I don't see anything else coming through, so I'll go ahead and begin wrapping it up here. As I mentioned, this is the first part of payroll. The second part of payroll will cover the steps that you would go through for each pay period, every week or 2 weeks or however often you run payroll. That is VCSAD 05B. So that will cover your steps that you take regularly, and additional courses, of course, are available if you want to learn about other modules or get refreshers on any other types of training. And finally, we also have our help out sessions. If you need any one-on-one time, we have technical support help outs, which are available in half-hour blocks if you have like some support questions that you might need some help with. Or we have training help outs, which are 45 minutes with a trainer, like myself. If you need a little more information about setting things up or how certain things work, we can work with you on that. Those are one-on-one. We just ask that you provide some information about what topics you're looking to cover, so that way the support person or the trainer can be prepared to help you out. And because it's one-on-one, it's your own time. So if you have specific questions, that's a great time to ask them. Okay. Before I go ahead and close out the session, I'll pause one last time. Any last-minute questions? Any last-minute takers? Okay. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and close it down. Again, you should receive a recording or a link to a recording of the session about an hour or so after the scheduled end time of the session to allow you to review this if you need to, or to share it with others. I want to thank everyone for their time today, and have a great afternoon.